with us to do that myself, also Neil Warwick, who's a partner at DAC Beechcroft, and Lee Sear, who is the Chief Executive of Svedi Solutions, who look at supporting businesses and business advisors nationally as well as internationally. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of our slot, but this won't be our only opportunity to ask questions. And what I would suggest is, as we go along, if you have questions, could I just ask you all again to put your mute buttons on, please, to mute your mics to minimise disruption. Thank you. This won't be your only opportunity to ask questions of the experts on the panel. There will also be an opportunity at the end. And what I would suggest is that if you do have any questions, as Jay already mentioned, pop them on the chat as we go along, and we will then group them and answer them as either the appropriate time arrives or at the end in the Q&A. We will then move on and hear from Rob Osborne, who's the head coach at Race Rapid in Mallory Park, about how they've handled the COVID crisis and what they have done to make amends to their business to allow them to trade. We'll also then be talking to Anders Mankart from the Leicestershire Golf Centre about what's been going on there, how they prepared to reopen, remembering that golf was one of the sports that we were allowed to play earlier on in the lockdown. We'll then move across to Kevin Routledge from Morningside Arena, talking about what the arena is doing to prepare to get back to business. And then finally, we will hear from Mark Barber, who's the head of community development at Leicestershire County Cricket Club, and he will be talking to us about what is happening in cricket and how he particularly has been working with grassroots level cricket clubs across the county. So without further ado, we will move into, first of all, looking at the COVID measures. As I've already said, please use the chat facility as we go along and we will gather your questions. If we could have the next slide, please. Thanks, Lorna. So the first thing that we will look at is how you start to prepare to get reopened if you haven't already reopened. And the first thing that we would advise and that you really need to do is to conduct a risk assessment. And that's an assessment of your whole business, and it shouldn't just be about COVID. Particularly if your business has been shut, your premises will have been standing empty, so you will need to check heating and water systems. If you've got water in a tank, you'll need to have that checked for Legionella, and you may also want to take this opportunity just to review the safety and working order of any equipment that you have. As I've said, you need to check everywhere, including exits, entrances, bathrooms, kitchens, staff rooms, etc. Okay, no stone should be left unturned. However, one thing that you will need to do is consult your staff and volunteers in doing so. They will have suggestions. They will see things from a different perspective, and they will also be able to help you. Another thing we would recommend is looking at your governing body or governing organisation to see if there are any specific actions relating to your sport, but also they may have, as I'm aware with British Athletics, they have provided some sample risk assessments for things like the track, and I'm sure that other sporting bodies have done the same. I know, that, for example, that Swim England have, and Mark's going to be talking about what cricket's doing, so please check with your governing body or the organisation to which you are affiliated to see what help and support they have. They may have sample assessments on their website that you can download. You'll need to review your procedures, and this is a standard risk assessment template. If your governing body doesn't have one, there is this one available from the HSE, and the slides that you'll get from this presentation have links to that page in the website from HSE to access that information. Can we move on to the next slide, please? It is vital that you consult staff in doing your risk assessment, and these are the things that you need to think about. Who might be harmed and how? What you're already doing to control risks? What further action you may need to take now, particularly in light of COVID-19? Who is responsible for what actions, and whether the action is needed daily, weekly, several times a day, at the start and finish of every shift, etc. We recommend that you record your findings and share them with staff, with contractors, with any associates that you use, part-time people who you buy in for sessional work, and with volunteers. The one thing I'd like to stress is you are not expected to eliminate all risk, but you do have to be seen to have been reasonably practicable. So you have to try to protect people from harm, and this means balancing risk against, the real risk in terms of money, time, and trouble. Okay, so it is about taking that balanced view. Neil, is there anything you want to add legally from this at this point in time?
No, I think that the advice about it being reasonably practicable is the most important bit, and probably the best way to view that is what would the average person in the street think was reasonable in the circumstances. So it's without sounding like the government guidelines, it's applying common sense, but from the perspective of how would it look if something went wrong.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. It's carrying out a deep clean of all of your areas of the premises, both before you open, but also as you go. So at the end of every day, and where appropriate, cleaning and disinfection across the day, particularly in areas of heavy traffic. If you're using gym equipment outside, you probably want to get people to sanitize the equipment that they're using when they've finished using it. But really, they should be doing that anyway. And most gyms do encourage people to do that, but you may need to put extra hand sanitizer stations in, and extra posters and notices around to encourage people to do that. You'll need, as I said, that thorough clean, and PPE where harsh chemicals are used or where you would normally use it. You will also need to identify how staff are to use the kitchen and the toilet areas, again, to protect themselves and to other people, and look at where workstations, tills, etc. are shared, have cleaning protocols for the start and finish of those shifts. Neil, did you want to cover off what was being done about toilets in some of the hotels, please?
I get all the glamorous topics. Just before I do hotel toilets, throughout the session, and Meryl and I'll stress this, sometimes we use the phraseology PPE rather, and sometimes we say face coverings or protective equipment. And there is a distinction, particularly in light of the announcement at lunchtime today. So the use of PPE on this slide is exactly that. You do have to have the new British Standard style type 1, type 2, type 2R masks when using harsh chemicals. But you also have to think about what you're saying in terms of, if you hand out face coverings, either to staff or to visitors, be careful not to fall into the trap of saying that they're PPE grade unless they actually are, because you could end up with some liability. In terms of what Meryl was alluding to, I've been doing a lot of work with the major hotel chains who are looking at alternative ways to deal with things like toilets. One thought process they've come up with is to change all internal toilets to female only, and have essentially going back to the old days of having a toilet attendant to make sure that you are cleaning and doing all of the things that you should do, and then putting portable toilets in outdoor areas for male use. Again, just to try and separate the two out and make it as easy as possible for people to maintain sort of hygiene. The other thing that you will have to think about, and we haven't had time to amend the slides, bearing in mind that the announcement was literally at lunchtime, disposal of face coverings, whether they're PPE or face coverings that staff or visitors have used, because the latest intelligence is that any transmittable disease can last up to 72 hours on a disposed face covering. And we're already seeing a lot of public health, environmental and waste issues where people are just taking them off and throwing them on the ground, which creates a dangerous hazard for the staff you employ to pick them up. So I'll shut up about toilets and face coverings now and pass back to Meryl.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Lorna? So what we're saying is you will need to think about disposal of those masks, face coverings. The guidelines recommend double bagging them and leaving them for 72 hours before you dispose of them. So you may want to again put that into your risk assessments if it's going to be appropriate for you. Then obviously it's social distancing where possible. I've put the 2 meters in brackets because even when we prepared these slides earlier in the week, we were aware that there may be an announcement reducing the 2 meters. So the announcement and now has stated 2 meters wherever possible, but over a meter where 2 meters is not possible. So you may want to put signs and notices up to remind people of social distancing guidelines, use email footers, any way that you can think, being creative, because you can also use those signs to advertise and upsell your own products and services, as well as reminding staff. You may want to use them, for example, as a scavenger hunt for people waiting in a queue, or some sort of quiz or a competition, again, just to draw their attention to the notices, but also to use them for that dual purpose. Make clear on your website what the measures are, and encourage visitors to think about and think about yourselves how you will encourage visitors to stick to the rules. What you may want to do is use your staff to have a trial run, a run through either your premises or a game or whatever you're doing, to test how the measures that you're putting in place will work. And don't forget, you can use stickers and tapes and wraps. There's all sorts of ways that you can advise people of the rules and remind them of the distancing. You can see in the picture here, there's a gallery in France near the Pompidou Centre that is giving out these hats that you can see in the top picture there. They have a range of designs and styles, but they are designed to remind people. They're made of papier-mâché, designed to remind people that that they should be keeping their distance. The next picture is of a restaurant in Japan that has put cuddly guinea pigs in some of the chairs, again to help people maintain those distancing, those distances, and to keep people safe. And the bottom one is another design for a restaurant where each individual sits in their personal cloche, again to help protect each other. Okay, so there are some creative things that you could do to engage people and to take notice of the distancing measures. So again, can we move to the next slide? And again, you can see on the image here a football field where somebody's drawn white circles around to give everybody their own zone. And Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club in the bottom picture have invited season ticket holders to have a cardboard cutout of themselves at a charge of £20 a head, stuck on a seat in the stadium. So it's a way of engaging the audience while they're all watching the football at home. So as you can see, some creativity might just help engage your audience a little bit more and help them come back. If possible, stick to one-way systems through buildings, and try to rotate staff and working hours. You know, it means that you can, the new rules around furlough means that you can have staff on furlough flexibly, which might help them deal with childcare issues or other caring issues as well, if they're homeschooling children, etc. Try to keep the number of staff on site down to a minimum. Where you can't use those protective measures, screens on reception desks and kiosks, again, you can be creative with that and use them to make an impact and engage and upsell. As we said earlier, we're now saying facial coverings for staff, but it's also important that you provide them with training in how to cover their nose and mouth effectively, or the protective covering will not have the desired effect. You may also want to consider taking temperatures of staff and visitors, and I'd like to call Lee in at this point because he's had experience of working with golf clubs who are doing that. Lee?
Yeah, some golf clubs are taking temperatures, and if it's above what the limit is, then they go for a more detailed temperature check, sort of like in a safe environment.
Okay,
and
thank
also
you.
with visitors as well. And
Yeah.
we're seeing that with race courses, for example, are doing quite a lot of temperature check of staff that are bringing horses onto courses as well.
Okay, thanks, Lee. So temperature checking may be also something that you want to consider to keep both your staff and your clients happy. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? Other things that you can do to help maintain that distance, and I know that certainly Rapid Race are going to talk about this, is setting up a booking system. This helps you manage visitors and time slots, also to collect payment in advance. Then you've got guaranteed numbers coming in and guaranteed income. only allowing small numbers at one particular time. I'm aware Mark has said that cricket is limited to sort of bubbles of 5. I'm a runner. I'm aware that running you're limited to bubbles of 6 for training sessions. And so if your governing body is saying that there are fixed numbers, then use that around your booking systems so that you can maintain those distances and help to safeguard both staff and clients. I would also say look very carefully at all of the activities that your business offers. Are there some that it would be best not to offer, either because it's not commercially viable because of the numbers that you would have to restrict that particular activity to, or because it would be difficult to safeguard people if you were to operate it? For example, when we talked to Twycross Zoo last week, they have not reopened any of their internal exhibits such as reptile houses because that's indoors and it is more difficult to maintain health and safety. Outdoors, obviously, you can have a larger number of people in a space without, and the virus doesn't travel quite so much. Also consider using phone apps and contactless payments for both time schedules and payment, but also to engage with customers. It might actually be easier for customers to book online with a phone, and it also means that you're limiting handling of cash. Talk about and with your staff staggered arrival and departure times. So you're minimizing the number of people on site, and you're controlling more effectively who's coming and going and when they're coming and going. And also look, and I'm sure many of you are doing this, at delivering activities remotely to engage an audience safely. So live streams for coaching, classes and training sessions. Okay, Lee, is there anything you wanted to add from the experience that you've had with golf clubs at this point in time?
No, I just think picking up on that last point and picking up an earlier point about thinking creatively. So here in the Northeast, there's a golf coach that's accessed one of the government business bounce back loans to set up a virtual coaching service, not only to cope with COVID-19, but also to provide a service if there's sort of like unpredictable weather going into the autumn and winter as well. So using some of the support available to be able to extend the virtual offer.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's a good, strong message, that you need to also look at your business model and see what you've learned from lockdown that could be applied going forward to enhance your business offer. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. We're now going to look quickly at staff. So if you've got staff coming back from furlough, they will have been out of the workplace for at least 3 weeks. That's longer than many would often have. They may be feeling rusty about procedures. You need them to learn extra hygiene procedures and to wear face coverings, etc. They're not coming back to business as usual. They may be stressed. They may not be working with their usual team, their usual colleagues. So our advice to you is that training is vital, particularly when new cleaning regimes, etc., have been brought in and they have additional responsibilities under that. And also to think about team building as part of that training, because they may not be working in the usual way with the usual people. And it's just a good idea to do something around team building to break down those barriers, help allay any fears, and to communicate the messages that you want to get over and bring people together to work as a team to deliver the services that you need them to deliver for your clients. And I think as a business owner, it's also being open and honest with them that mistakes are made and failures happen. We saw Matt Hancock patting somebody on the back in the Houses of Parliament the other day. We all are, we all do make mistakes, and I think it's being open and honest with them that you may not get it right, and you'd like their input to help you get it right, how you're going to run your business, but also to share ideas and listen to any ideas that they may have about either virtual services or how to deliver within the constraints that we have to operate within. But also we would say, don't just focus on work, keep up the social side where you can, particularly around sport. Could you turn your microphone off, please? And to use helplines and professional advice where needed, particularly around staff, either your governing body or if you have membership of things like the FSB and the Chamber of Commerce, they will have legal helplines that you can dial up and use, and please do so if there's something with staff that you are unsure about and you need some extra support on. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Neil, can I hand over to you for this one? So this is particularly around RIDDOR reporting if you think you have a COVID case on site.
Yeah, so this isn't, I'd stress this isn't new. This is reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences. And it's a health and safety standard that exists already, but you're now going to have to pick up on it and apply it to coronavirus and COVID-19. I would suggest it's probably more pertinent for incidents with your staff. I wouldn't necessarily push hard for every visitor in checking them and seeing whether there's a dangerous occurrence, because the truth of the matter is the causation, tracking that back is going to be very difficult. But if you have a member of staff that is presenting symptoms, you should have a risk assessment carried out. You should maybe consider whether they need a lab test. And if it turns out that they've been asymptomatic and then the disease has presented itself, do your own track and tracing and make a RIDDOR report, because best will in the world, you cannot kind of risk assess everything away. So this will give you some protection and coverage from HSE that you've actually been doing everything you should have been. Unfortunately, an occurrence has happened, so you've reported it to reduce your liability. I think that's probably all people really want to talk about in terms of disease and death.
Okay, thanks. Can we move to the next slide? So coming back to staff again, employment legislation that you will operate by anyway and underneath still applies. So things like the Equality Act, regardless of COVID-19. But you may want to check if you have had staff furloughed that you are up to date with the employment legislation changes that came in on the 6th of April. I'm sure you're aware of them, but they apply to the minimum wage has been raised, for example, and the government has introduced an extra bereavement leave for bereaved parents. So you may want to check out the details of that, and you may need to amend policies and procedures around those two things in particular. We would recommend again that you, if you've got access to a legal helpline, that you access it to make sure that your policies and procedures are up to date. There will be staff who need some flexibility because they're homeschooling or they can't get childcare. So again, using use of the flexible furlough system and talk to staff. There will be some who are unwilling to work with you. Most of them are willing to work with you in our experience, but this is where those legal helplines and membership packages really do come into their own. If you are stuck and you don't know where to go, again, the Growth Hub will be able to signpost you to local support and experts who can help you with that. You may want to review your staff contracts, particularly as we may face further waves of lockdown, either local or national, but you will need to consult staff about any changes to their contract terms and conditions, and we would recommend that you take proper legal advice or from an HR expert before you do this. Staff can still go on holidays in this time, and you may want to use holiday rotas to increase that flexibility, but also to make sure that staff get appropriate rest and recuperation, because it is quite stressful trying to remember all of the social distancing measures while doing your job at the same time, and presumably having additional cleaning responsibilities and social distancing responsibilities as well as that. Okay, but just to stress, the same other than social distancing, the same rules and regulations as normal apply to staff returning from leave, taking leave, being sick, etc. Okay, can we move on? If you've got less than 5 workers legally, you don't have to write anything down, but we would always advise that you create an audit trail and that you do write things down. I would also advise that if you have self-employed sessional staff coming in, that you consult with them as well, because they will be representing your business when they're delivering sessions, training sessions, gym sessions, whatever it might be, and that I would also recommend that you get them to sign to say that they have seen a copy of your health and safety policy, any amendments to terms and conditions, and particularly that risk assessment and issues relating to cleaning procedures. Neil, did you want to add anything about that audit trail at this point?
Well, yeah, I mean, audit trails are going to become very, very important as we sort of drift in and out of lockdown, and restrictions are lifted and reimposed, because unfortunately, from a legal perspective, I think we're about to walk into the blame game, and it'll be about liabilities and who's responsible for it. So wherever possible, if you can keep a written record and show that you've done everything that was practicable, i.e. acted like a reasonable person, it should give you a level of comfort and protection. But again, with the disclaimer, you can't kind of sort of get rid of all and every liability, but you can mitigate and you can reduce your risk.
Okay, thank you. And as Neil said, get those audit trails in place. If you can't see the staff physically because of distancing, then we would recommend that you send it with an email with a read receipt and ask for a confirmation email in return that the member of staff has seen the email, has read its contents and understood it's how what you're asking them to read applies to them and their role. Okay. So the other thing that we haven't touched on is that you will need a health and safety representative. That representative should be chosen by the workers. You, as the employer, cannot choose the employee representative. Okay, so can we move on to looking at the next slide, please? Okay, and then just to touch on, because we are running in towards the Q&A time, if staff have a concern, discuss it with them, note it down, and again, keep that audit trail going. Also look at the fact that people may be stressed, look for signs of stress in employees, and again, perhaps ask people to complete stress questionnaires or signpost them to sources of support. We're all facing huge changes. It's a very stressful time for everybody, and coping with changes in work and juggling work and family life is particularly stressful at the moment. So be aware that staff may need a bit more flexibility in terms of working hours, but that may also help you keep staff numbers down and keep shifts shorter and use that flexible furlough system. And we move on to the next slide, please. Okay, the other thing is to think very carefully about customer and visitor safety and risk. So I'd like to bring Neil in here to talk about firstly about disclaimers.
Yes, I mean, this is going to be one of the trickiest areas. I think it's reasonably clear cut what you should be doing with staff, people who are attending regularly as part of their employment, but it's going to be really, really tricky, particularly for hospitality industry, sports industry, pubs, clubs, restaurants, all that sort of thing, to get the policy right about what liability do you have when somebody's on your premises. And I would really strongly advise people to take control of this at an early stage and make some very clear policy decisions about what you're going to do if a staff presents symptoms, what you're going to do if a client turns up refusing to wear face coverings or presenting symptoms. What you must do is get as many disclaimers in as possible to say it is not your responsibility for the visitors to your attractions, and have the absolute discretion to refuse entrance or ask somebody to leave. Particularly if you get back to sort of sporting events and alcohol, it's just obvious there's going to be problems with social distancing, and the 1 meter plus rule that's just come out will not be adhered to. If you observe somebody doing that and placing others in danger, you need to have a clear policy that says, that person must leave the premises immediately. And if you don't enforce the policy, then the disclaimer probably won't work very well for you.
Okay,
That's that one.
thanks, Neil. Okay, so just quickly before we move into questions and answers, the other thing to check is your contracts, to check your liability. If we could just show that slide quickly, Lorna, please. So check your liability, see what your contract clauses say, speak to your insurance provider, and if you are in doubt, seek advice, because claims in insurance documents and contracts can be interpreted in more than one way, and we would advise you to seek advice around that. So are there any questions that have come through while we've been talking?
Meryl, it's Ali. Just looking at the questions that are coming through. We've got a question about face masks. I think, Neil, you were talking about face masks, about what face masks people should use. We've got another question around, if you're self-employed, who's responsible for cleaning of the toilets in a village hall or a shared venue? And then there were some questions around temperatures. What if women are ovulating? Would that change the reading? The cost and availability of the checking equipment, and whether people should be using kiosks or scanners. I don't know who might pick those up.
Neil, did you want to talk about the face covering one and the liability for self-employed people using other people's venues?
Well, yeah, I'll pick up on all the various different liabilities that have sort of threaded through a number of the questions that have come through. So on the face coverings, to be clear, just to add to the confusion of the day, British Standard, a CEN number, has come out in terms of quality of face coverings. And the standard is a sort of hybrid between the AFNOR system in France and the specifications that existed for medical face coverings. So you will probably start hearing the words type 1, type 2, type 2R face coverings, which are all medical grade and of the highest kind of barrier protection. But you have to think through what you're going to do with this. Do you want to have your staff with the highest possible protection? Arguably, yes, I'd be looking for British Standard face covering, but are you going to insist on visitors having that same standard, or are you going to hand out face coverings? You know, I would say your policy needs to deal with the staff and give them the best possible sort of barrier protection you can, but have a policy that applies to visitors so that you're doing everything a reasonable person would do, but you're not taking on a liability of claiming that you're either giving them a covering of a certain standard which offers protection, or you're being reckless. In terms of whose responsibility is it to clean toilets, if everybody is doing things right, each venue should have its own policy about what the cleaning regime is. And before you start at clubs in the village hall, for example, you should check their policy and see what they say about it. And if in doubt, or in the absence of a policy, have your own written policy about, you know, if one of the club members uses the toilet, do they need to take a sanitizer with them and clean that toilet? Or is the toilet not going to be used again? You know, again, it's sort of proportionality. But first instance, it's the venue's responsibility. If the venue hasn't taken responsibility properly, then you're going to have your own policy in place. What was the other one? It was about taking temperature.
Temperatures, yeah.
Again, be careful about what you do and don't know. Testing your staff for temperature and having a policy of how you do that is one thing, you know, because they're the regular visitors, so they're the higher risk in terms of transmission. Testing visitors, you know, what happens if it's a hot and sunny day? You know, there's all sorts of variables there, but essentially you're asking your staff or some members of your staff to put themselves in a potentially risky situation by getting closer than the 1 meter rule for a temperature. Are they adequately trained to use those machines? What if they let somebody through because the machine wasn't working and they are transmitting? Or what if they you know, don't pick up on something or exclude somebody from the venue, because there's all sorts of complications there. So I would say strong policy for whether you want to test temperatures of staff. Be very cautious about whether you're going to go to visitor testing, because it could throw up more liabilities than it solves.
I would also add to that, look at what your governing body says, because it may be that the governing body has set guidelines about taking temperatures, you know, particularly for athletes if they're going to compete and things like that. So just be aware, as Neil said, to be very careful, but also check with what your governing body says. Okay, and I think that's our time out now. So thank you to Neil and Lee. If anybody has questions for either Neil or Lee, please put them on the chat and we'll pick them up at the end. And if I could ask now Rob Osborne from Rapid Race to join us and talk to us about what you've been doing over this period. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Meryl. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Osborne, head coach and director at Race Rapid. Just to give you a quick overview on what we do, to make everything I explained a little bit clearer. So we are based at Mallory Park Race Circuit, and we use that facility for swimming, cycling and running. We're the only private open water triathlon venue in the UK. So generally, what we started doing and what we've reintroduced is the general public to come and do what started as individual training. So that could be swimming in the lake, be cycling around the circuit, running on our run circuit. Next slide, please. So if I cast my mind back to the middle of May, I was about 2 or 3 weeks away from closing down, from going bust. And then the announcement was made by the government that we could introduce open water swimming as well as cycling and running outside during lockdown. So that then, obviously, that was news to me, real positive news for me as a business to allow us to potentially trade again. So I started carrying out the first steps, and the first thing I did was absolutely key was gather as much information as possible as to, okay, how do I go about thinking about trading again. So this involved discussions with insurance companies, and the reason why I put that on there was because if anything was to happen, it was an unknown situation for all of us. If anything was to happen, we need to be sure that any insurance in place would cover us, and they would allow us to be happy for us to carry out our activities. This was again in combination with governing bodies. It's already been touched on already. I deal with England Athletics, British Triathlon, cycling. So a combination of those governing bodies.
Rob,
yeah.
Apologies for butting in. Your sound keeps going in and out, I'm afraid. We're just wondering if you could lean forward. That might help a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, John. I'm using my laptop microphone. Maybe it might be covered up.
That's perfect now. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Cheers, John. Yeah. So I've been liaising with the governing bodies from the get-go, ensuring that everything that I had planned was in line with what they recommended. Obviously filtered down from Sport England, filtered down from the government. So in combination with that, I had to deal with the venue itself. So Real Motorsport, who run the facility at Mallory Park, to ensure that they were happy for us to carry out trading again in their facility, which I lease. And in turn, that allowed us to start discussing about how we use those facilities, the shared facilities such as the toilets, the changing rooms, the shower block and everything like that, and how we actually get our customers on site. As well as that, obviously, restrictions have been changing quite regularly. So keeping on top of that, I would recommend everyone do this, is to absolutely know it inside out, what the restrictions are, what they mean, and how they would fit within any facility. And I think I'm quite lucky because a majority of my space is big and wide and outdoors. Okay, so after I gathered all that information, I moved on to planning and how I was going to implement those restrictions on site. So with the physicality of the actual site, how I would communicate that to customers. Do I blast out a date and say, right, guys, we're going to be opening on this date? Probably wouldn't be a wise idea, because I had a hell of a lot of other hurdles to get over before I could even think about a date of opening. But I made our customers aware that we are building up to opening, and made it as loose as possible. Then I had to think about how to protect our staff. It's already been talked about already, and that would involve, procuring equipment and stuff like that. And in turn, that would then help me find an actual start date as well, because a lot of the stuff was on long lead times. And then one thing that I think is potentially overlooked by a lot of people is the actual financial impact of reopening. You have to outlay quite a lot of funds to actually get yourself ready to reopen, be that equipment, be it online systems or whatever. They're all costs for companies that are potentially almost at rock bottom anyway. So we had to plan that and see how that looked and how that's going to see us through for the next 12 months. And then, of course, our additional risk assessments. I completely stripped out all of our risk assessments that we had in place, purely because I had to make so many changes for each individual activity, and everything was literally turned on our head, which I'll come on to again in a second. And then putting everything into practice, the preparation of the venue, it hadn't been touched for 3 months, so we had a load of weeds in the lake that needed clearing. The one-way system, which for pedestrians, which I probably changed about 3 or 4 times before we opened, until I was comfortable that it would be suitable. So getting all the signage put up and everything like that, it was a long process. Next slide, please. Okay, so what have we done? I broke it down into 3 areas. So the first thing that we needed to really tackle was how to reduce the on-site interaction with our customers. So in doing that, Meryl already mentioned it, about we've gone to a fully online pre-booking system. Now, before that, this part of our business was pretty much 99% cash handled, and now we're 100% online. Now, the benefit of that, as you can imagine, is that it completely takes away or massively reduces that customer interaction on site. So customer facing, no touching of notes, no touching of coins, and then we can extract all that information from the customer on an online database and ensure that we've got a list of all those emergency contact informations before they've even stepped on site. And we know how many people have come in for each session that we've got broken down. And it actually makes my life a hell of a lot easier. So that's something that we've introduced. And even after we're out of this mess, I'm going to continue to do that. I'm not going to revert back to the old system, because it's made us absolutely more streamlined for booking, and it gives us a lot more cover and or financial cover, certainly, because we know what's coming. I took away the option for spectators to come on site, purely because I know we touched on about the social side earlier, but I really wanted to get away from that on site. So I made it the social side of our stuff that we do is people like to sit and chat and talk about their training that they've just done on site. So I didn't really want to introduce that. So I was quite strict on that. So we don't allow spectators. We want people to come in and do their training and then leave the venue as safely as possible. I've already talked about our one-way pedestrian walkways. For those of you that have been to Mallory Park, we've got a bridge that takes us over to the paddock area, which is quite narrow. So I had to somehow figure out a way how to get people off after they've come in. So we've introduced a one-way system with a marshal to take people across the circuit. Then the social distancing measures for each of our individual disciplines that we've got. I've worked with the governing bodies and used their policies on their social distancing ideas. So draft zones for swimming and cycling and stuff like that. And I restricted the number of people that we can have on site at one time. So each activity session has got a limited number of folk in it. One other thing that I had to think about was, well, actually nobody's swam for like 3 months. So how am I going to handle that? It's not just the COVID-19; it's the impact that the lockdowns had on people. So I had to think about, all right, okay, how can we make it safer? So again, I risk assessed it to death and completely changed the swim course. We introduced like a stage build-up system where people had to do like swim the 200-meter loop, which is for beginners first, where you can stand up if you need to before they then go on to different distances and build it up that way. And then we absolutely blatted the place with signage to make sure that everyone was aware of the rulings around this, as you can see in the photos. Next page, please. Okay, so some challenges that we've encountered. Obviously, that's just a snapshot of our online booking system, which if anyone's thinking of going that way, I'd absolutely recommend GymCatch if everyone's involved in group bookings. It's so easy to use and it only costs like £10 or £12 per month, and it's got absolute flexibility. Last week was probably the first challenge I had when Wednesday night we had all the thunderstorms, and I can't open on when we've got an electrical storm. I can't let people swim, so I had all these people booked in who's paid, and then I had to stop the session. So working around that, how I had to change my policy literally in an instant. So that was some challenges I had to do. The bottom right hand picture there is detailing, showing one of our experienced swimmers who used to been coming down. I had to change the swim route. The swim course was different, so I obviously had to explain to every individual before they entered the water what the new swim courses were and things like that. Okay, and then to finish off, some top tips that I've certainly learned. Absolutely plan and research thoroughly everything from your governing bodies, insurance companies, to what you can actually do and how it would fit within your venue. I'd recommend that you don't like try and rush back. If you're given the green light to open up, don't rush back until you're absolutely sure that everything's going to work and you've got everything in place. And be as dynamic as you possibly can when you do open up. You know, it's not going to be exactly to point and right when you open up. So expect to make some changes and be dynamic afterwards. Listen to your customers, and I picked a handful of customers that I know to go and test the site out and tell me what you think, and if you think I can change anything, then please feed it back to me, and we'll implement it. And then lastly, my biggest worry was like, well, everyone's going to be like sheep. They're not going to know where they're going, what's going to happen. But we've all been through this for the last few months, and we know the restrictions, we know what's going on in the world, and they actually get it. The customers get it. All they want to do is get back to doing what they were doing before. So they will do what you say. They will do it, and they'll do whatever it takes to get back to doing the activities that they love doing. So that's all I've got to say, really.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rob. That was really good and very succinct. So we go straight to Anders at the Leicestershire Golf Centre.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'll try not to repeat any of the information that's already been shared, which is brilliant. So I'll just like to share my situation, really. And what we tried to create was as contactless an experience as possible. I'm fortunate in that we have a lot of space, but we've got three centres here. We've got the golf course, we've got the driving range, and we've got the coffee shop. So in terms of the coffee shop, we just cleared it out. So
Anders, your connection's not very good. Could you try sitting a bit closer to the mic, please, or looking at your Wi-Fi connection?
Can you hear me now? Bear with me.
I think so. Do you want
that any better?
That is better, yes.
Okay, I've just turned the camera off.
Thank you.
So we tried to create a contactless experience, really. And I've got the space, but I need to manage people. And obviously everybody's raring to go. So when we opened, we had a lot of people arrive on day one because they'd been pent up for 2 months. But you have to manage the people. And initially what I had to found was I needed to get my staff trained. I needed to get them on message, so all of them are exactly towing the line I need them to tow. And you've got to be seen to be showing that you care about your customer and that we're all on the same message. Now, in terms of my personal experience and practically, that meant having a booking system. So we didn't, we tried to minimise the amount of people in one venue, but contactless was all the key for me, and social distancing. The signage, the picture on the left is the signage we put up on the driving range. And what I found was I had an endless amount of signage initially, but it was too much. And nobody really took any notice of any of it, to be brutally honest. But they were sort of from various governing bodies. And what I found out is I did my own, and I just needed 2 or 3 bullet points, and I made them very clear and very bold. As soon as I'd done that, people took a lot more notice. They'll read 2 or 3 points. They might not read 20. And I found that really beneficial, actually, to have clear markings on the floor and clear signage of what I needed them to know at that particular venue. If we could have a look at the next slide. As you walked into my driving range, on the left there, I had cleaning, various cleaning agents, from sprays to wipes to anything you could imagine. And as I'll come on to, that's manned quite a lot of the time, but not all the time. So I give people the opportunity to have wipes. Sometimes you'll need to press one button to play golf here on the driving range, and I at least wanted to know that you could wipe that button should you need to. The bays themselves, as you can see on the picture on the right, they're very, very well spaced out as they are. So they're already 3.5 meters apart with barriers between them. So we had the space. I just needed to manage the people to make sure that they were socially distancing, and not to make it uncomfortable or awkward for a fellow customer, really. If I could have a look at the next slide, please. Can we have the next slide?
I think that's all the images. There were just the 4 images.
Oh, okay, fine. So for me, it was about training the staff, having policies in place. But the biggest thing I did was I employed a security guard to manage the driving range for me at peak times. Now, a security guard sounds perhaps a bit drastic in terms of a driving range, but he was more of a guest liaison officer, a big guy, but he was there to welcome people and to put them at ease. So people are nervous, and my golfers are sometimes elderly, and they've got to feel comfortable here. And I felt that if I've got somebody in charge dealing with the social distancing, I was going to put my customers at ease. And it also took the pressure off my staff from having to step in and deal with somebody. I could almost contract that out to somebody else to deal with that on my staff's behalf. And I found that, like your previous guest said, people have got this message. They've got social distancing. You get told off in the supermarket if you get too close to somebody. The only people I have found that are not adhering to it as much as I would like to are young lads in the 16 to 18-year-old category. And I found I had to step in numerous times early on to really clamp down on them social distancing. But as soon as I put this security guard in place, he's dealt with that for me. And I have to say, that issue has disappeared altogether. Now, it may be that they're towing the line or that they've gone elsewhere. But most importantly, my customers are now comfortable in that nobody's going to get too close to them because we are policing that situation. So I think it's an expensive thing to do, but I feel it was a good investment.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Anders. That's great. Can we move on to Kevin now? Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Moving on, slides. So this is the Morningside Arena primarily I'm going to talk about. It's a community sports arena, but which holds lots of different kinds of events. and we have some of them up there, whether they're election counting, riders basketball matches, Bollywood concerts, karate championships, and so on. So the next slide. This is the configuration for a riders game, and ideally that's what we want to get back to. Obviously, Prime Minister didn't talk about events like this today. Moving on. So what have we been doing? Our challenge is, and I think it was alluded to earlier by some of the other speakers, it's all right reopening, but can you reopen in a sustainable manner while giving confidence to your users? Recognizing, first of all, we're 3 different companies. So there's Leicester Riders Basketball. We have a charity called the Leicester Riders Foundation, which does a lot of work in schools and with the universities and with the Home Office and the Police and Crime Commissioner out in the community, but also at the arena. And then we have an arena, the largest of its type in the city of Leicester. And the arena is used by the riders, but also for community activities, corporate and major events. And our particular challenge is the major events, including the riders' games, effectively subsidize all the community activities. So you can't do one very easily without the other. So moving on. And this is a kind of music event we have. This is a Bollywood concert. So there'll be 3,000 in the building for that. And that's going to be quite challenging to get to that configuration. Moving on. So what have we been doing? Since we've closed, we've been quite aggressive in preparing for what happens next. So the whole venue, which is just 4.5 years old now, has been deep cleaned from top to bottom. We've done a complete repaint inside of the building. We're busy at the moment just finishing off a complete redesign of the reception area. The purpose of this is to bring better control and access. Basically, we want to know at all times who's in the building. That has lots of benefits to it, but of course, for things like track and trace, it's essential that we know that. We've also redesigned the kitchen. We had quite a tight space for the amount of people that we have to serve. So we've expanded the kitchen to create more space for food preparation and so on. Food and beverage is a large part of our income. We've also closed off access to certain parts of the arena. Obviously, we'll unlock that as we go on, but we decided to pull back to what's the minimum access that's needed for particular types of events. And we've got new hand sanitizers all around the building. On to the next slide. So one of the other things which has been mentioned by other parties, we had a new ticket system we were implementing, and we've adopted that now to become an online booking system, which includes things like COVID questionnaires. It includes waivers, so people accepting that we can't take responsibility for them contracting COVID, and also so that we have all contact information. That produces a scannable ticket, and that ticket then allows you to get into the building. We're at the moment on mandatory pre-booking, scanning, and within temperature, in-venue temperature check when people get there. We've also appointed a COVID-19 officer. That's again required by HMG guidance, particularly for elite sport. We've developed a new risk assessment and risk mitigation model. As was said earlier, we basically started from scratch, and we developed one that's compliant with HMG guidelines, also with our governing body, Basketball England, and also with the international governing body, FIBA. On to the next slide, please. So the other things that we've had to develop are new staff training models and compliant training programs for the elite athletes. Elite athletes are allowed to play basketball on their own. Again, there's quite a lot of government websites on the gov.uk website around what can be done and what can't be done. We've been testing all of these new systems in the last few weeks. Basically, we've allowed riders, players, and junior international players to come doing their own training, but subject to a training regime that is set out in advance. That limits any interaction between the players, limits where they can go in the building, and so on. It's socially distance is implemented in there, but we've designed it so we could adjust. So, for example, today, Prime Minister is talking about going from 2 meters to 1 meter. I expect in time it will stop being a distance and it'll be time at distance. So we'll need to adjust again for that. In other words, you'll be allowed to be closer together for a shorter amount of time and so on, since it's a risk-based analysis. So again, what we've tried to do is to potentially allow for that. We've also basically turned all the transactions in the building into contactless arrangements, again, for the reasons that were stated earlier. We're, in the meantime, monitoring the HMG guidance, because as we all see, this is being updated almost on a daily basis so that our processes can evolve. And then we've also developed some financial models, because again, this is all very well, but decisions have to be taken on when staff come off furlough, whether they come off part-time or not, and what you do in terms of potentially redundancy when furlough arrangements change in September and October. So that creates need for minimum levels of income, depending on what the overhead is. You can vary your overheads to a degree, but once you open the building, you've got a certain amount of heat, light, insurance, and so on. There are a number of apps that are around that I've seen in various sports around the world. Quite a lot of companies are busy designing apps and software that will be very useful for crowd control. They're tending to focus in on football. Obviously, that's where the money is. So it's all about limiting numbers in an outdoor environment. But again, we'll need to be able to modify them in due course for the indoor situation. I think that's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we move on now to Mark Barber, our final speaker, please? Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, Mark Barber, Head of Community at Leicestershire County Cricket Club. I've been asked to speak more today than regarding the recreational game and how we've been supporting that to continue. Essentially, we've been working really closely with the national governing body, ECB, to look at sort of 3 phases from the date that lockdown was announced into returning back to play. So those 3 phases were protecting the game, preparing to return, and then obviously getting back to returning to play and that play phase. So we took a decision really early on to sort of move to a reduced number of staff and furloughing our team. We made sure that on our website we housed really specific information all around the coronavirus and the updates that were coming out nationally. We made sure that we were passing on that information as best we can to everybody involved in recreational cricket.
Are you on the?
So we ran a webinar right at the very outset to inform clubs. We invited clubs to in a similar platform to this and made sure that we gave as much information around their concerns, and their major concerns were very much around funding and being able to keep the lights on once we get back to the other side of this terrible virus. So we ran a funding webinar and we made sure that we informed those clubs about the options that were available. Clearly, there was a reasonable amount of emergency funding made available to recreational sport, and that's where we came in. And making sure that we provided that information from the outset was really important. Thank you. Can we have the next slide, please? So we talked very much about what clubs could be doing in the initial phases themselves to reduce their expenditure to give them the best chance to stay alive and stay open. But we also made sure that we communicated really clearly to them that they weren't to sort of rush into any commitments, checking on their insurances, etc., checking all of their current commitments to make sure that they could stay right on top of their finances. And we gave them some really clear templates around supporting their finances and how they were going to get back to operation as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. We thought it would be really sensible to have a visual that outlined the funding landscape and made it really clear to understand. So we gave a bit of a stepped process of how they could access funding. And off the back of this, we're really absolutely delighted that we've been able to support cricket clubs across the county to access just over £500,000 to keep the game alive, which is an amazing result. Next slide, please. We also talked about how one of the concerns that some clubs had mentioned was around what's going to happen to their members. Are they going to still have people interested in the game? And we talked very clearly about what they could be doing to engage their members and how important that could be. And we've just highlighted some really good examples of things that cricket clubs and people within clubs were doing via social media to really capture the engagement of their members. Some really good examples of sort of online quizzes and also fundraising things that cricket clubs have done. You may or may not have seen a national campaign that ECB have run. They branded it as Together Through This Test and talked very clearly about what the game is doing to support the national effort. And very, very clearly, we're in the middle of the cricket season right now, and we can't, and clubs can't play. So what are they going to do to keep them involved? And we talk very clearly about the things that they can do, the activities that they can do to have a wider impact on more than just their game. Next slide, please. So we talked about the sort of stepped process to getting back to some sort of activity, and ECB have worked really closely with us as county cricket boards and supported the recreational game to provide some really clear guidance. Again, using the infographics that were really, really important to make it clear and easy to understand. The initial guidance was very much around 2 people could train together outdoors, nothing inside, and the visuals make it really, really quite simple to understand. Making sure that sanitisation was really important and adhered to, making sure there was a club representative on site. A couple of colleagues have talked about booking systems, and cricket clubs have been asked to implement those as well to make sure that they were able to track and trace who had been using their facilities. Should there have been any cases, then that reporting mechanism was there. Very quickly, if we move on to the next slide. So soon after that, there was a shift to small groups. So now the current legislation, the current guidance is around 6 people can gather in an outdoor space. And again, the infographics were updated, and we've been that conduit to make sure that we've provided that level of information as efficiently as possible to all of our clubs, and made it really clear that they did all that they could to have activity on their sites. But what we said that was really, really important was that no club should feel pressured into starting this activity if they weren't able to do so. It was really important that public health was the absolute priority, and that the clubs should not feel that they should open because of the pressure from members to open as quickly as possible. Thank you. Next slide. And the most recent sort of advice that's come from ECB is to display a stepped process on the return to recreational cricket. Clearly, it's frustrating for a lot of people that are involved in the game that they are seeing that the England side are back to training, and there's going to be test matches in the coming weeks. But it's really important to distinguish the professional game and the measures that can be put into that professional element in comparison to the recreational game, and what is essentially run predominantly by volunteers. When we consider cricket clubs, the majority of those cricket clubs, and there's 120 around the county, the majority are solely run by volunteers, and it's really important to not rush into things that are beyond the capacity of an army of brilliant volunteers. So currently we're in step 3, which is around small group training. We were semi-hopeful of today's announcement, sort of moving towards the next phase, which is around adapted gameplay. But it's very much every step that ECB and ourselves release is very much governed by the government advice. Essentially, government advice, government update comes out. ECB work with the counties to translate and interpret all of that information to provide the most relevant advice to the game. And eventually we will get to step 5 where we're back to unrestricted cricket. But at the moment, and ECB have made it very clear that it's very difficult to see at this point in time how we can get back to that during this summer. So it's really important to sort of acknowledge that we are supporting the recreational game as much as we possibly can. We've made sure that the money has gone back into the game to keep clubhouses and clubs alive. And hopefully when the green light is given, clubs are going to be in a really good position, having done all of the minimum sort of maintenance on their grounds to be ready to go as quickly as possible once that green light is given. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Can we move back to questions and answers? I've seen quite a few coming up there. So if I could start with the one, Neil, could I hand over to you to ask about if a club is not incorporated, can individuals be personally liable?
Very easy one, yes.
Yes.
I wouldn't recommend not having some kind of constitution or incorporation. And if you're signing registers or you're on the committee, then yes, you can be personally liable.
So in that instance, I would take some advice on getting a constitution or some sort of organisational structure as quickly as you possibly can, and where possible, avoid signing anything until that's sorted out. Would you recommend that, Neil?
Absolutely, but I mean, you know, chicken and egg as well. We've just spent the best part of the last hour and a quarter telling everybody they need policies and audit trails. You know, you still need that, which is creating something in writing that you could be liable for. So the incorporation point is the key there. Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you, Neil. The second question was, community centres are open but gyms are not. What is your advice regarding resuming exercise classes that are taught within community centres? Should we take our lead from gyms? I certainly very clearly heard today that gym indoors was not allowed, but I am aware that some gyms are operating with 6 people per instructor outside. What would your take on that be, Neil?
Well, to answer the question properly, yes, take your lead from gyms. So, you know, just because it's a community centre doesn't mean to say you can have exercise activity, even if it's limited to just 6 people and a metre apart and all of that. And I think we'll see a upshot of, you know, boot camp type outdoor style training for a while. That's maybe the way that the community centre should pivot rather than risking breaking lockdown rules, but I think we're just too risky, you know, in terms of potential transmission.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think given that the weather's good at the minute, we can take advantage of that and get people outdoors, you know, back to exercising with the relevant restrictions and safety guidelines. So yes, continue to take your lead from gyms. And a further question on that would say, private studio owners who teach dance classes, specifically partner dancers in a close hold. Again, personally, I think this was made very clear this afternoon. The Prime Minister said contact sport, which to my mind would include a close hold dance, is with family members only.
Yeah, I've got to fully agree with that. So husband and wife learning to dance, fine. Couples from different households, no.
Yeah. And Bridie's saying, when you listen to the announcement, it announced no exercise, including yoga or dance. So that is for indoors. Yeah. So I think stick to the guidelines and continue to liaise with your governing bodies, your private membership organisations, whoever you use to guide the way that you operate that business. And if in doubt, also seek independent legal advice. Given that we've still got some time and we've got no further questions at the moment, unless I've missed any, Ali?
Yeah, there is one about information about effective hand sanitizers and equipment. I don't know.
Okay.
Just sharing information.
Sorry, I can't see that one.
That was at 3:10 from Colin.
Right, okay. Does Colin want to come on and unmute his mic and perhaps explain what it is that he would like? No, okay. Okay, so hand sanitizers, I would recommend that you again look at the HSE guidelines. There are hand sanitizers which are very portable, which I think I showed on one of the panels. You can simply though put a table out with hand sanitizer pumps and things on. You don't need to go to a great deal of expense. The issue is that you provide hand sanitation and or hand washing facilities for people to use. So I think, you know, again, it's about using common sense and making sure that it is proper alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Okay. Chris had a question. Chris, do you want to unmute your mic and ask your question? Chris Mortlock. No. Chris. No. Okay. So Neil, can we move back, given that we've got a little bit of time, to covering again those disclaimers and making sure that people check their contracts, please?
Yeah, just before I do that, just picking up on a message that Lee's just sent me back to the liability of committee members. He's saying through his work with the PGA, he's seen several committee members of private golf clubs being held liable when the golf club has been prosecuted by HSE and the Environment Agency. So that sort of reinforces the advice we were giving earlier. In terms of the contractual position, I mean, I think given the time, we sort of skipped over that slide earlier, but, you know, we start with our usual routine about force majeure clauses, the clause that nobody had ever heard of until sort of the pandemic hit. There's a lot of well, casework and case law going on as we speak about the interpretation of force majeure, which is effectively what used to be called the act of God clause. There's a lot of separation out of that clause now, where pandemics have been specifically excluded from it. There's a lot of aggravation and arguments with insurance companies about the foreseeability part of pandemic control. You know, that it wasn't foreseeable in March. Is it foreseeable now? There's lots of arguments about business interruption. And then we've heard lots and lots of chat from the presenters in particular about making sure they've got waivers and disclaimers that basically say it's at your own risk when you come onto the premises. You've got to have your own safety equipment. You've got to have your own face coverings now, you know, and be interesting. I mean, if you want to throw back to some of the presenters, but, you know, are you going to immediately move to the 1 metre social distancing, having spent all that time and trouble putting the 2 metres in? And if so, you know, does that mean we're going to have to look at the waivers and the disclaimers again and try and make sure that we're, you know, always stating that we're within government policy?
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Neil. And we've had a comment from Bridie. For anyone in fitness, if you haven't already joined the CIMPSA Stronger Together on Facebook page, that is covering all of the fitness related guidelines and updates on advice and some additional webinars. So thanks for that, Bridie. Just to open the field now to any of the other presenters, to Anders, to Mark and to Rob. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Any further advice or guidance that you would give? And as Neil said, will any of you be going down to that 1 metre rule?
I'm happy to go on the 1 metre rule. Just in terms of that, essentially we will work with ECB as the national governing body, and it will be a game-wide approach to that. Clearly, there'll be a number of people that are really pushing to get back to some sort of cricket and using that 1 metre announcement to try and look at ways of getting the game going again quickly. But very clearly, as Boris Johnson said today, cricket has to wait. The distance isn't necessarily the issue within that game. It's more the ball and the sharing of equipment that is the major issue, and that's been something that we've sort of implemented on the outdoor sessions, that the sharing of equipment has to be minimised as much as possible, and any ball sharing is strongly advised against. So everybody should have their own ball, whether it's a club ball and numbered and sanitised in between sessions, or bringing their own ball to a session, and making sure that the risk of infection is completely minimised.
Okay, thank you.
Can I second that one as well, Meryl? So on the 1 metre distancing thing, obviously now that's changed today. I'm not in a position at the moment where I can change my rules at the drop of a hat. So anything outside of the activities, or people carrying out the activity, obviously will follow the government guidelines approaching the activity. Now I
Rob?
can reduce that to 1 metre. Is my speaker not working again?
Yes, yeah, it's not working again. If you could come a bit closer, thanks.
I literally have to put my head in my laptop. So as I was saying, anything that's outside the activity, I can reduce it to 1 metre, but carrying out the activities, I have to follow the government, my governing body guidelines. So until that message rolls downhill to the governing bodies, and then they individually release their updates on how their restrictions are looking, I don't think it's wise for us to change what we've got in place at the moment. It will be a matter of days, I would imagine, but yeah, until that message rolls down, I won't be changing it for the activities. But anything outside of that, infrastructure-wise, we can do it, I think.
Okay, thank you. Anders, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, we'll go with the government guidelines always, to be honest, and we'll certainly move in accordance with their guidelines. And I think people will get to grips with the new rules. But I think a lot of people will also stick to the two just to be safe. But we go with what the government says always.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin, I noticed that you would want to say something.
Yeah, I just an observation really. As an indoor venue, we're not allowed to open to the public. As I mentioned, where we are open to specific things. But this is a business discussion. Business is about taking risk, manageable risk, and we won't be in business if we don't take risk. And I'm talking about in the generality and in the specific. So I think we do need to be giving thought to how we manage risk going forward. Government has to deal with a whole lot of very, very complex, diverse situations, but we all face very specific situations. Can we get enough money in to cover our costs, and can we manage risk sensibly? So I think all this guidance we got today will change again in a number of weeks. It's a moving feast all the time. You can look and see what happens in other countries. They're moving on. New Zealand is back playing sport in full stadium. So I think it's important that we don't get too obsessed by all of this detail, which is simply interpretation, an interpretation by scientists of very complex modeling and risk, and we still have to get sustainable businesses out of it somehow.
Okay, thank you. And John, you had an issue? John, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Meryl. Good afternoon, everybody. Jay's opened the webinar talking about the business gateway, the growth hub. And while I'm conscious that some of you on the call today will be aware of the growth hub, I'm sure there's many that aren't as well. And it was really just the offer is there, guys. You know, we have a team of 10 business advisors, highly experienced business advisors. The support that we offer is free, it's fully funded, it's impartial, and it's independent. We've talked about lots of different things today, I appreciate that. But if there's anything that we can do, we're committed to helping as many businesses as we can across Leicester and Leicestershire, not just within this particular sector. And you may have seen a slide a little earlier that was talking about some clinics. So this is a follow-on really from today. What we want to be able to do is build on these and provide some additional resource for you in terms of accessing support. There's been conversations around the legal side of things as well. So through the Growth Hub, we can access specialist advice in insurance, legal aspects, all sorts of different things really. So that's all I wanted to say really is that if don't struggle out there, that there is support, and please do come and knock on our door, because I can assure you we'll open it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. We've just got one final question, Neil, if I could pass to you. What if staff, volunteers or customers don't adhere to the rules that you're putting in place? I think it's going back to what was said earlier, but Neil, if I could pass over to you just to reiterate that about having a policy in place.
Well, yeah, you have to have the policy in place, but you also have to outline the consequences, both for the staff and for the clients. They don't have to be exactly the same for each category, but you have to make it clear, you know, if a member of staff is going to repeatedly breach whatever policy you have, that's an HR matter and should be escalated. If, you know, clients, you know, when we heard from the golf club earlier, aren't going to adhere to the correct social distancing and having two sort of young men as children, I can completely back that one up. But you have to have some kind of policy that says they will be ejected, they'll be asked to leave the venue, they can't come back to the venue. But the key thing is that whatever policy you choose, you must actually enforce it. It's probably worse writing down a policy and then failing to enforce it.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. And just to reiterate, I sit on the board of a charity, and we have had to issue disciplinary proceedings against one of our employees in the charity who repeatedly failed to wear the facial covering that he was asked to, and his hard-toed boots in a factory environment. So that has been escalated. You know, we treat the COVID issue as same as the PPE issue. It was escalated to a final written warning. Okay, so I think that's it for questions. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much, and to remind you that there are clinic support available. If anybody would like to access that support, please let Jay Ladd know in return with your feedback and when she sends you the slides. And she has now displayed, thank you Lorna, the Business Gateway contact details for those of you who may want extra help and support. So I'll hand back to Jay now. Thank you very much for everybody's participation this afternoon, and thank you to all of the speakers.
Thank you, Meryl, and once again, thank you everyone. And I have sent you the feedback forms. If you can please complete those, send those back to us. We'll get the slides out to you, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
That